How many of y'all are iOS developers by trade? All right, that's a lot of you. I did not expect that many. But I describe this to be sort of like Adventure Time or another one of those maybe subversive cartoons. It's good for kids. It's good for people that aren't as, maybe newer to this kind of stuff, aren't as familiar. But there's some, jokes, dirty jokes for the adults for you to enjoy. So this talk is Secrets of Objective-C. Let's just get into it. Objective-C. I like to think of it as a bridge between worlds, because really it is. It is built upon the vestiges, it's built on top of the foundations of two foundational languages, two of the best languages that have ever existed. So Objective-C, then, thus, must follow and become one of the greatest languages of all times, right? Something like that. Seriously, I'm a big fan, as you'll see. You'll be sick of me bragging about Objective-C. Anyway, those two languages, of course, are Smalltalk and C. Smalltalk was invented in 1972 by Alan Kay. I mean, this is a superstar lineup right here. Alan Kay, Dan Ingalls, and Adele Goldberg. It's object-oriented, inspired by Lisp, and involves message passing. Actually, Objective-C, if you think about those square brackets, everybody thinks that those are arrays, array literals, maybe the first time you see Objective-C. If you think about those instead being curved, nice and parenthetical, it starts to look a little bit more like Lisp. It's elegant, it's nice. The message sending syntax comes from Smalltalk. The original idea of message passing, actually, I was reading this, I think it's in the book What the Dormouse Said, one of the great chronicles of early 1970s, 1960s tech culture in the Valley, this weird intersection of people experimenting with LSD and computers at the same time and trying to form, I mean, this is the time, these are heady ideas. There were startups, right now we're doing startups for the next big social network. Back then, we thought we were going to do AI startups to have real artificial intelligence. We didn't quite understand how hard the problem was, or maybe we aren't actually being as ambitious as we could be. Either way, the idea of message sending actually comes down to Alan Kay thinking about microorganisms and the way that messages were sent between cells, which I thought was fascinating. It's not, nouns, it's not humans interacting, it's cells, which I think is a really interesting way to think about it. It's something that we've maybe lost. C, also created in 1972, profoundly important year for programming languages by Dennis Ritchie, of all people, and the rest of Bell Labs. It is, by contrast, procedural and inspired by a language called ALGOL. It's also the successor to, as you might expect, the language B. That's just how it goes. Big deal about C is Unix. The tie-ins with Unix, the operating system, the intimacy between those two. You can't have C without Unix, really, because a lot of the system calls are maybe confusingly also Unix calls. It's not exactly clear where the divide is. The two are integral. And the philosophies seem to be consistent. Unix is all about single-purpose, sharp, small tools. C, similarly, is designed in a way that you will be using and creating small parts that interact with each other in very limited ways. This is a procedural language. It's a very, it's a low-level, primitive kind of language, right? You're dealing with, actually, literally primitives as compared to Smalltalk. Put the two together, and it's kind of like chocolate and peanut butter. I really think they work well together. Or to put it a different way, I think it's like a philosopher with a bazooka. It's this high-minded idealism of Smalltalk, the idea that we're sending messages as if we were like microorganisms in this dynamic system, this emergent consciousness of creating computers. And then we actually have a system that can make it work, C. C is the most battle-tested language out there. So, philosopher with a bazooka, that's Objective-C. Objective-C came 10 years later, in 1993, invented by Brad Cox and Tom Love. If you look it up on, if you look it up on Wikipedia, the descriptors that they use are static, dynamic, and weak, which is tough because that means literally nothing. Those three descriptors don't really mean anything. In the discussion of computer languages, really, what does that mean? Okay. Anyway, it came out of Next. It was used in the development of the first Next systems. Next licensed Objective-C until it was bought by Apple. Around 1992 or 5 is when they actually bought the trademark of Objective-C, and it's used in everything. It's the foundation of every single thing that you use on the iPhone and Mac. And it's been that way, if you trace it all back to the next step vestiges since OS time. So we're talking about decades long. The original app kit and foundation, if you were to look at them back then, you'd see pretty much the same stuff. In fact, one of my colleagues has a next step, the Cube, a workstation right by his desk, and he was trolling through the mail program on there, and he was looking into the application bundle in application foundation kit.framework or something like that, and he found this, what is it? It's this picture of a very young, oh God, what's his name? The guy who just got fired, Forstall, Scott Forstall. It's a picture of Scott Forstall. It's a TIFF file. It's like NS about me. It's from the 1980s. And if you open up a Next Step system, you can see a TIFF file of Scott Forstall, the guy who founded, he was the big proponent behind iOS and was cut a couple years ago. So we're talking some deep Apple ties here. Basically, modern Apple is based on Objective-C. And that's where the NS comes from. NS stands for, depending on who you ask, either Next Step or Next Step Sun, due to Sun's deep involvement in the early time of Objective-C. So that's what the NS is. It lives with us today. Yeah, so that's the sort of generations, right? We start off with the Next Step. Apple acquired them, and Mac OS X, around the same time that the iMac came about, sort of the second coming of Steve Jobs, that's when the second generation of it happened. And we have this really vibrant third generation, this new life for Objective-C, and probably the reason why most of us know it at all, the iPhone in 2009. So yeah, static, dynamic, weak. Terrible, terrible descriptions for any language, because really, I don't know, static, okay, yeah, there are static types. You declare your type whenever you declare a variable, but you can opt out of it. If it's an object, you can just say it's an id or id. I actually haven't had much consensus even internally at Apple for how the hell you're supposed to say id. Anybody say id, right? Yeah? Anybody say id? Okay, a couple people shyly putting their hand up. I don't know. I guess it's ID, whatever. So you can kind of pass those around, not care so much about the strict typing. It's dynamic, as in that the dynamic dispatch of methods. It's actually messages being sent. So whenever you perform a selector, that's going to go to a dispatch table on the meta class and actually hook up the implementations of a method to the selector. So object performs selector at selector. It's going to look at that dispatch table for the method with the selector bar and go to its corresponding implementation, which is a function pointer for all intents and purposes. And then I don't know what the hell, what was the other one? Weak. Yeah, weak and strong, used as a descriptor for a language, doesn't mean a damn thing. It's just used for people to disparage one language that they don't like. So they say Objective-C is weak. I don't know. Sounds like strong should be better, right? I don't know. So one thing that does actually make a difference here, of course, that Objective-C has a couple nil types, nil, nil, and null. The capital N nil is for nil classes. The cool thing here is that it's not whiny. Unlike in other languages, whenever you send a message to nil, it just returns 0. It doesn't break anything, it just silently fails, which is actually really nice behavior. It means that you have a lot fewer checks for failure in your code. I find it to be a very nice feature. One of the great things about Objective-C is how much Clang has driven it forward. I think more than any other language, it's getting better faster than anything else. There are very few languages that can match the pace year to year of Objective-C in terms of raw features and improvements. A lot of people, detractors, would say that it's because Objective-C didn't start off as very much. And they have a point. I mean, it's only recently that we got object literals, that you didn't have to use 15 lines of code to create a dictionary. You know, that you had to box all of your numbers manually. That was tough. But, I mean, so I got started around iOS 3, so that's like 4 years ago or so. It's like a totally different thing now. Auto-synthesizing methods, manual memory. Oh, yeah, Arc. Arc's a big thing. The main thing is that you don't have to manage memory manually anymore. Arc is one of the greatest, it seems like a fairly unique development in programming languages. There's this question of, okay, there's a contrast between garbage-collected languages and ones where you have to manually manage memory. Whenever you alloc memory to the heap, you have to free it later. Arc takes care of that by taking advantage of the strong conventions of Objective-C. The idea is that you have retained objects from certain kinds of methods. You have create rules. And then the compiler can automatically just sort of figure out what it needs to do and inserts the calls for you. Not just inserts the calls, but takes away any redundant calls as well. and it's a solid system. It's been around for a couple years. Everybody knows and loves it. TIOBE has an index of the top languages, which is based on popularity. That itself is derived from search traffic. And they named it the language of the year in 2012. Actually, if you look at the graph, it's startling. That thing that just comes out of nowhere after 2009, that's Objective-C. It's now either number 2 or number 3 behind C and Java. Of course, a lot of people say this index is of questionable value, that the documentation that is being linked to in these search engines is not being read as much. People are talking about it, it's all hot air. Whatever it is at least a data point. Even if it's of questionable merit, I still like to think that there's something to this. Because really, that is the story of Objective-C. It went from nothing to being one of the most important languages today. So for the rest of this talk, enough bragging about Objective-C. I want to talk about some good parts. This is where people who are totally bored by what I was saying before, because you clearly know all that stuff, we're going to talk about some things that maybe you don't know, unless you're a religious reader of NS Hipster. So I will hope to at least give you one thing that you can come home with. Yeah, by contrast, this is JavaScript the good parts and JavaScript the definitive guide. Note the inches of spine that are left over. This is PHP the good parts. Tiny book. Actually, I think that book actually exists. It doesn't have a very good review on O'Reilly, but I like that one a lot. Start with KVC, key value coding. It's one of the dynamic ways to program in Objective-C using strings. Strings are generally bad for programming because they have weird ties to linguistics. Whenever you're talking about a string, it can encode a lot of different things, right? It can be a key path. It can be a value. It can encode a literal chunk of data in base 64 encoding. It can encode a sentence. It can encode a name. Lots of different things. Strings are terrible for programming. But they can be useful in some cases because you want to be able to easily dynamically message objects, and KVC allows you to do that. You have a person, you can send value for key and name, and that'll return their name, which is probably an NS string itself. You can nest that, so you can value for key path, and that dot separates the key paths, so you can get the name of the spouse of this person. If this person is not married, if they're a bachelor, spouse.name will return nil. It won't blow up because nil gets messaged, it returns nothing. From nothing comes nothing. I think that's actually a pretty good programming paradigm. You also have, on a collection, if you have people, and this is one of the weird things about Objective-C, a lot of people complain about the fact that arrays don't have types, so you can't safely message an array because it might not be homogeneous. It might have heterogeneous types, so you might have a number in there that don't respond to name, and that will crash your application. But in this case, assuming that this people array is actually populated by NS persons or person objects, value for key path, name, will just return an array with the name of each person corresponding to that index. It gets even cooler whenever you add these collection operators. So you can get the average salary of all the people just by doing this value for key path at average, AVG, dot salary. And there are 5 collection aggregate value key path things, operators. You've count, sum, average, max, and min, which is just a really fancy thing. If you ever have the opportunity to actually put that in your code, you feel really good about it because it's just bragging. It's just bragging that you know it. So of questionable use, very cool. There's also Objective-C runtime.h. These headers are the black magic, the dark juju of programming. You don't know what you're getting yourself into until you give this a look. There's a lot of things that you can unlock. Basically, you have this sane, logical universe, relatively so, in Objective-C, and by importing this, you are trying to break all the rules. You are creating glitches in the matrix. You are making just cats and dogs live each other in perfect harmony. It's crazy. Crazy time. You can do all these things. You can swizzle your methods. You can literally replace methods where they were before. You can associate objects on existing classes. So that means that you can create properties where there were none previously. It's spooky. You can also create dynamic class definitions. So at runtime, you can create new classes and inject everything into that dispatch table. That's the benefit of the language being dynamic, is that you can do all these things. It's also its great disadvantage. When used correctly, this is actually very useful. A lot of people don't use it correctly, though, and that's why people get angry whenever things break, because you were assuming the same logical universe, and then all of a sudden cats and dogs are getting along together, and you're like, I've added an assertion check against that. Like, and then assert is failing now because cats and dogs like each other, because somebody swizzled cats and dogs. You also have compatibility alias, which is a neat @compiler macro. And what that allows you to do is, for instance, if you're trying to target older platforms as well, and iOS, let's say iOS 8 introduces something really neat, you could ostensibly write your own version of this, @compatibility alias this for previous versions, and you could call it as if it were the same class. Previously, like UI collection view was a big deal. A lot of people wanted to create applications built on UI collection view. There was an open source implementation of that worked relatively well, at least to the point that you could ship an app on iOS before 7, and everything would work out as well. Yeah, just pretty well. So @compatibility alias gives you the opportunity to do that. Frameworks. You can't talk about Objective-C unless you talk about all the frameworks that are built on top of it, what's collectively called Cocoa. Actually, I'd love to see, if you guys are familiar with a guy named CPG Gray on YouTube, he has this brilliant video where he it takes a long time to explain the intricate relationship between like England and Great Britain and the United Kingdom and the British Isles and the Crown. It's just this crazy intersection that doesn't make any sense. I would love to see that for Cocoa and Cocoa Touch. I have no idea what qualifies as Cocoa anymore, or Cocoa Touch, or what anything is actually called. But collectively, frameworks. There are a lot of frameworks that we can work with. GCD library, I guess, kind of at that level between library and framework, one of the biggest differences to be made in Objective-C. Grand Central Dispatch, basically it's like a turbo button for your code. You can dispatch things asynchronously to the background, and then whenever the work is done, you dispatch back to main and you return the result. Combined with blocks, you can create methods that just do things in a very friendly way. The user can call it, and then they have this completion block that gives you the result whenever it's finished. If you're writing like a networking library, this is really great because you make your networking call, it executes asynchronously in the background, and then whenever your response is returned from the server, you get everything that you wanted when it's done. It's great. I don't need to tell you. GCD is great. Foundation. It is the standard library that other languages would kill for. It is perfect. It is not perfect. It's great. It's really good. How good? I'm going to rant about it for the next 10 minutes. Linguistic APIs is where I like to start. I think that one of the greatest measures of a language is, or its standard library, is how good its string implementation is. I cannot stress how important that stuff is. It touches everything in programming. Again, it touches language, it touches symbols, it touches data, everything. So linguistics APIs, how much you actually pay attention to language, it's important. And actually, just a short rant here, I don't know why it's taken as a given that every language has mathematical functions. Sine, cosine, tangents, constants for pi and e, like those are obviously very important to the implementation of language. Math is, after all, what the universe is made out of. But when you're programming, maybe there are more important things, like, I don't know, the definition of words, or the idea of grammar, or the, I don't know, the existence of units, like kilograms or pounds. That's sort of getting on a tangent, but I often wonder and think about why it is that math is the one thing that we can agree on. Anyway, linguistics, it's very important. And a string. It's a class that encapsulates all of the linguistics. It's a starting point. Fully Unicode friendly. You can put emoji in there, it handles it. It handles any language that you can think of and a lot that you haven't heard of. In conjunction with that, NS Linguistic Tagger is really great. It can tag and parse sentences based on token. So that's tagging part of speech. It's lexical class. You can get names out of there. You can get lemmas, so you can actually figure out, so you have ing forms of a word, you can get the original word out of that. And it can tell you what language and what script it's being written in. So it can tell you that you're reading it in English and the Latin script, or in Russian and Cyrillic. This is an amazing thing to be built in. Like, other languages would kill for that. Here's an example. I'm not sure how well this is coming up. Probably not very well because the contrast is super low. But you're creating an NS Linguistic Tagger. You alloc init with tag schemes. In this case, we're going to use all the available tag schemes for the language EN, English. And then we pass in our options. We're going to omit white space and punctuation and join the names together. So when I put in the question, what is the weather in San Francisco, and enumerate all the tags, what do I get? What pronoun is verb the, determiner weather, noun in, preposition, San Francisco place name. That's built in. You can build your own Siri, with, I actually think voice detection, voice recognition is built into iOS now. You can build your own version of Siri if you think you can do it better, and it's local. You don't actually have to make any network connections for this. That's amazingly powerful. So, yeah, it'll also tell you your language is English, which is really useful. NS Data Detector is also similarly crazy. I mean, you're used to these features because you use iOS, ostensibly, but these things are available to you as a developer as well. Things that it can detect detect dates, it can detect addresses, links, phone numbers, and transit information. So flight, your airline, and which flight it is. If I were to create an NS Data Detector and look for addresses and phone numbers and pass in the string that obviously has an address and a phone number in it, as you might expect, it gets the address and phone number out of it. And the address, it separates out into fields. So it knows that that's the street, and it knows that there's no city or region or postal code or country. But if there were there, it would deal with it. NS Data Detector is a subclass of NS Regular Expression, which makes you wonder what the hell regular expression is built on top of that. Like, how long is that thing? Maybe it doesn't actually use regular expression under the hood, but it's fun to think about. And then my favorite function of all time, CF String Transform. It is an API on top of the International Components of Unicode, ICU. It provides transforms. It can do lots of things. It can strip diacritics, all those squiggly bits that we don't get in English, that you might get in your favorite Balkan language. You can get rid of those in case you just want to make it plain old American ASCII, something good like that. It can also tell you the name of emoji. For instance, this. Anybody know the name of this one? It's Big Face. Yeah, exactly. So you can get the name of all those emoji characters that you've been typing, and you're like, Love Hotel? What is this? We'll talk. Yes, okay, let's say we have international input. You obviously are creating an app. Oh, it's not obvious. Whenever you create an application, you reach an international audience. Just guaranteed. There are going to be users that are putting things in languages that you don't speak, you don't understand, but you still want to work with. Let's say that you're saying hello in all these languages. You're saying hello in hiragana, in Japanese right here, in Thai, in Arabic, and in Chinese. How do we deal with that? Well, we put it into CF String Transform, doing the transliterate to Latin, and it turns into something everybody can read. Hello, konnichiwa, swasdi, mahaba, ni hao, right? Something like that. But again, we don't want those squiggly bits, so we pass it in and we strip the diacritics and combining marks. So we have American ASCII here, and that's something that we can actually deal with. Let's say we're creating a text parser, and we want to, we have international titles for movies or something like that, and we want to create an index that whenever you search on an index, you actually get what you're writing. I don't know how to type Arabic characters very well, but I want to be able to search for things based on what its name. I want to search for al whatever. So if I do this, if I put my entry text and we put everything into Latin or some base transliteration, then we can index on it. Because this is what we get if we put it through a CF string tokenizer. We get all of these. These are tokens. We put it in, and now we can index on that. So I don't care if you can say konnichiwa. Like, if you can spell it in English, you can search for it and get the Japanese back. That's at least the idea. Amazingly powerful, and again, crazy that that's built in. Date and time programming. I'll go a little bit faster. NS calendar. There are a lot of different calendars. It's not just Gregorian. I mean, I didn't even know that there's an Islamic civil calendar, and that's different than the Islamic calendar. Japanese is actually a very interesting calendar because they have, in addition to years, they have eras. So each era is actually defined by the life of the emperor. That's more of a vestigial thing now. I mean, they have a really cool date format, but they basically use Gregorian, and the eras are sort of ceremonial. But still, minor differences. Arabic calendar or Islamic calendar, crazy. It has between 12 and 14 months, depending on the year. Some months have 2 days. It's crazy. But all these date and time things that you don't want to deal with, it's already taken care of you with NS Calendar. Again, this is a 3-decade-old framework, so it's really covered all the bases. Another cool thing about NS Calendar, it has this new function as of macOS 10 Mavericks. You can enumerate dates starting after date, matching components with options. So let's say we wanted something to run, or we wanted to know every day that's a Sunday, weekday equals 0, hour 2 o'clock a.m., and we wanted to enumerate every single one of those. This will actually do this correctly even on daylight savings days. Let's say you have daylight savings time and 2 o'clock. Let's say that was 1 o'clock instead, or something like that. Whatever the logic is, like whatever the missing hour is, it would actually just do it at the next possible time. Or that's the options block. You can either have it match on the next hour, or just skip to the next week. That's a powerful API, something that would take a really long time to write, and you probably wouldn't write it correctly without extensive unit testing built in. The URL loading system is something that is pretty great. You have all these things, requests and responses, 2 different ways to connect, because why do it just one way? You have built-in URL caches, so every time you make a request, it'll save it to disk if you want it to, or save it to memory. It handles cookies, it handles authentication challenges, so you can authenticate against just anything from basic auth to Kerberos or something more advanced like that. And then you have this NSURL protocol thing, which is basically an Apple-sanctioned man-in-the-middle attack. It allows you to sniff and change the incoming and outgoing traffic whenever you make a request as necessary. So that's pretty cool. It's great for stubbing and mocking URL requests and tests. NSURL and NSURL components are notable because they are great implementations of these RFCs. If you are an RFC aficionado at all, in the slightest, you'll know that these ones are really specific about how URLs should be handled, and you'll be happy to know that NSURL and NSURL components take care to do those things correctly, behaving as you know URLs should. What is that? Okay. Sort descriptors, predicates, and expressions. Again, this is more programming that you don't have to do yourself. I don't know why sorting is a whiteboarding problem. That should just be a given in a language, right? Like, how often are you writing merge sort? You should never be doing that. That's people that are smarter than us, that have spent more time on that, and have a working implementation already have done it. So why reinvent the wheel? Sort descriptors, they allow you to sort by multiple criteria and break ties. So we want to search by first name, then last name, then age. Or maybe we want to search by age, then last name. Either way, that's just the order in which we pass the sort descriptors. Sort descriptors take a key, which again is sort of this key value coding. You can say ascending or descending, and then you have this optional selector. In this case, high degree of care and attention to details with localization. So localized standard compare will operate correctly based on the locale. In English, I don't even know what the sorting rules are. I think we have accented characters after everything else. But in Swedish, for instance, a ring doesn't necessarily come after A. It might come after O or something like that. I'm not exactly sure what the sort order is, but it's not exactly intuitive. It's just the standards that we expect in that culture, but other cultures are totally unaware of. Predicates are also nice. You have this predicate language, which is similar in some ways to LINQ in .NET or something like that, in the way that it's this sort of DSL that is beloved by people in their respective communities. So in this case, we can find all the people with first name of Bob, last name of Smith. You can do substitutions there, or you can do comparators like greater than or equal to 30 for age. And you can search and filter and sort things very easily. NS expression is also neat. You can pass in just an equation and it'll evaluate for you. So it's not like Wolfram Alpha level stuff, but if you're writing a calculator app, this is all the code you need. It handles all the notation you'd expect. It'll parse it out for you, and there you go. And you can use that in your own code to do some more aggregate calculations, or NS predicate can be decoupled or decomposed into these 2 NS expression objects. NS error. One thing that I like about Objective-C and its conventions is that you don't do this. It's very rare that you'll have somebody doing try, catch, finally, unlike other languages where you're catching exceptions. Instead, the pattern is that whenever things fail, you're setting a passed-in error pointer. So NS error star auto-releasing star is a reference. Localization, there's internationalization, accessibility. Dude, there's a lot of stuff to talk about. Yeah, too much. So, I can... Oh, what's going on there? Thank you. Now I can just yell a little bit. Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff to talk about. There are dozens of system frameworks. Too much to mention. Too many things that I love about this language. But the greatest thing is that you get to work with the iPhone. Like, seriously, the amount of hardware that's built in that stuff, I haven't even scraped the surface, right? You have a dedicated motion processor now with M7. If I sound like I'm coming off as an Apple fanboy, yes, okay, sure. But it's really exciting as a developer that you have this thing that everybody has in their pockets that can do unbelievable amounts of processing at once, are built in with all the software, and it's just there. You got it. You can build amazing things without having to lift a finger. You're starting from a great default. That's why I love Objective-C. And one of the great reasons to love it is community. You look out, it's one of the greatest groups of folks that I've met so far. CocoaPods has been a great unifying force in that. For lack of a consistent and sane framework packaging solution from Apple, as in iOS can't really load frameworks and static libraries are really shitty, CocoaPods solves that problem and actually in the process is creating a great community. Whereas open source was completely unknown. Think about this. Before 2009, there was very, very little open source Objective-C. Today, there are over 4,600 pods in CocoaPods, 4,600 libraries doing things that you may want to have done, and they're already done for you, and they're well tested, some of them. Most are not tested, let's be honest. But they're really great, and they're all available, and you can search, just go to cocoapods.org. You can search for the pods you want. There's also Alcatraz. So if you're doing Objective-C, obviously you have to use Xcode. Xcode is a plugin system. You're going to use Xcode, at least for the provisioning, right? Or something. You're going to have to touch Xcode. When you do, make it really nice for yourself with Alcatraz. It's an Xcode plugin manager by my friends Marin and Delisa. Alcatraz.io is the website. Right now there are 116 plugins. Holy shit. Well, they're not all plugins. Some of those are color themes, some of those are templates, but that's the number of things you can install with Alcatraz. That's accurate today, as of a couple hours ago. Anyway, so that's a lot of the things that I love about it. If you want to learn more about things to love about Objective-C, you can go to nshipster.com. I wrote the book on the left back in November that came out. NSHipster Obscure Topics in Cocoa Objective-C. It's a great starting point. My new book is coming out 1 month from today, or yesterday, CF Hipster Ref, which honestly, there's so many things that I developed just because the name works. I will admit to doing that way too often. In this case, it's an obvious pun, right? The lower level thing is going to be CF whatever ref, right? So this is lower level programming. If you're interested at all in things like the security framework or GCD or really digging into Accelerate, this is going to be a great book for you. You can pre-order it today. I'm Matt with 3 T's on the internet if you ever want to get in touch. Thank you so much. And for anybody that did not get any information that was new, I apologize. This is your opportunity, though, to ask me anything if you want to, in fact, learn something new, if you are completely satisfied. I want everybody to be completely satisfied. Any questions? It can be about Objective-C or anything generally. Yeah, sure.
So a lot of people, look to you for a lot of information about all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm just curious, who do you look to in the Objective-C community for good information on this?
Sure. I mean, like they're content experts in many amazing niches. So what was his name? Rundqvist. He's from Stockholm. He has this great website, and he's one of the foremost experts on the internet about core animation. David Rundqvist. If you go on his blog, he has amazing blog posts where he's with animations. He will describe in great detail how CA layer works or how animations work. And those are things that I haven't had much recent occasion to use, so I'm less comfortable kind of explaining that stuff. I haven't been developing iOS. I developed a lot of iOS applications during my time at Koala, but there's been like this 2-year hiatus where I've been focusing on web and more infrastructure stuff. So when it comes to application stuff, his blog is great. Some of the lower level hackers, Mike Ash, of course, is great. His NS blog, he has like every 3 weeks or so, he does a Friday Q&A where it's like, let's implement NS Array. It's impressive. It's amazing. That guy's great. And just the immense, Peter Steinberger's a great writer, a prolific open source contributor. And a lot of these writers are all on Objective-C.io, objc.io, which is a publication run out of Germany. Every month you get 5 articles from some of the best developers. So it's that and some of the great code that's put out on CocoaPods. Look at the most starred, and those are going to be really good libraries generally. So you read the code, read the authors. So it's more than any other community that I've been involved with, really on their game as far as all these people.
Are you still working on a incremental store?
Maybe. Yeah, I'll see if I have some bandwidth. It's one of those projects that Well, I haven't had much occasion personally to use it, so it's difficult to find time to work on something that you're not actually using. But we'll see.
Are you mainly working on Mac apps now, or you're still doing more like?
Here's the fun thing. I did a lot of, so I just left Heroku recently, and for the last 2 years there I was the only iOS guy. I come to Panic, an iOS and Mac shop, and I'm doing web stuff. It's just ridiculous. No, I'm doing iOS stuff too there. So, yeah.
So, I mean, speaking of bandwidth, how do you find the time to write the articles on Hipster and still work at Panic? And do they give you time to go off and write that stuff? Because it's
no. So I write NS Hipster articles. I will admit that I write them the morning that you read them. I just wake up really early and I decide on what to write and just write it right there. Sometimes I spend a little bit more time on that. So that's sort of a minor investment. The rest of the stuff, it's the old expression of selling the sawdust, that you create things and the byproduct of research is knowledge. And the byproduct of solving a problem in code is understanding. And sharing that understanding is just a little bit more work. And sharing your code and presenting it in a way that other people can use, it's just a little bit more work. So if it looks like sort of a Herculean effort, if people are being very prolific, really what it is that they are just recycling a lot. So I'd like to think that I'm good at that at least. It's not so much that I get to work on that more than other people. Cool, yeah.
So that library that extracts information from strings like addresses
Mm-hmm.
and such, how well does it deal with ambiguous situations?
You can test for yourself. It's built into the OS. So if you're on the iPhone or on the Mac and you find a string like in Mail, and then some UI web views, if that is enabled, if you hover over it or if you tap it, you'll see like those are the things that it is able to detect. It's not perfect, but it's pretty damn good. It even does relative dates. So yesterday, for instance, or yesterday night, like this morning, stuff like that. Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much. Again, Matt with 3 T's on the internet. Feel free to ask me questions. Thanks.